Uh, yeah, Grant Dillman was the head boss in Washington for United Press International at the time. And whenever I got the appointment there, another reporter had just left. We had a three-man team at the White House. One of those men being the very famous Helen Thomas. I forget why the opening came, but that it wasn't unusual to have somebody in any normal situation resign or whatever. Anyway, the opening came and he said he gave it to me, and I said fine, and he said, well, don't be too impressed that enjoy the first time you walk up the White House driveway, because after that it becomes a job. And he was absolutely right. It was very exciting to be admitted through the iron gates and the Secret Service cordon and see all the majesty of that big white building on the hill and the huge building next door, which is, you're sort of in the center of things finally. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the heartbeat. And that was it. I just got to work in a small, tiny room with two other reporters that would be in and out covering different things. The downside of that was we were on duty. Somebody was on duty 24/7, and
so you were pulling more than a couple of graveyard shifts?
Wherever the president went, we had to have somebody with him. And it was more than just covering the president, because we had to be part of the advance party or the advance team. And then after he finished speaking, we had a very short time to file our stories and get back on the press plane. Or if we were part of what they call the tight pool, then we left with the president and motorcaded back to Air Force One and back to Washington. So we usually needed help from the local bureaus as we traveled around to give us a little extra manpower, because we couldn't be everywhere all the time at the same time. And it was a hard job to do it right. Sort of like on the ship in Mr. Roberts, hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. But never knew what was coming next, always living in anticipation of a gunshot or some tragedy. For each trip, they had an advance staff at the press office at the time. Under Reagan was a pretty big operation, and of course they were trying to tell the story through their eyes, and I understood that, not necessarily what other people may have thought of the truth or not the truth. I mean, and we were there to relay their side of the story, not to do a lot of investigative stuff, because we just weren't equipped for it. We had people all over Washington doing that kind of thing about checking the background. There was just a constant flow of information, and we could not stay on top of it all without a lot of help. Our job was just to be on the front line and say the man said this or the man said that, and do a lot of poking around on the political corners with his staff members about the political issues of the day. But it was understood that your life would change whenever you went there. It was a difficult job. He was a son of a bitch. Always was. He wouldn't speak to me. And we sat side by side at a state dinner one time, and through the whole evening, we didn't swap a word. He was just he was a double-dealing liar, and so we just didn't talk. You know, he would give the briefings. We knew he was full of crap, and we didn't. He was sort of an outlier for the hate the press gang, and he really was. He was a tough guy, but you know, that was his job. He was just one of many.
So how tough did he seem when he tried to commit suicide via baby aspirin?
That I don't know anything about.
Oh, okay.
It wouldn't surprise me. But you know, he was just one of them.
Mm-hmm. And he had Pat Buchanan on staff too, didn't he?
Never met Pat Buchanan. Buchanan was more in the speech writing department. We never dealt with them. They'd do their thing, and those speeches would come out, and they would be vetted and read and corrected by a dozen or more people from the various departments, and then it would come back on eventually and be put onto the teleprompter, and Reagan would read it, and he was a master at that. Everybody thought he was making these extemporaneous remarks, and it was all written down for him. But he was a natural actor. He had been trained in that, so he had a teleprompter on this side and a teleprompter on this side, and he would look back and forth and just wow the crowd. But he was actually reading a speech, and he did it better than anybody I've ever seen, because he knew how to do it.
Yeah.
Well, it came as a surprise to me, the fact that it came out. We didn't know anything about that. I just knew Nancy Reagan to be a nice, cold, calculating bitch, and she had a ton of influence over her husband. So whenever the stargazing thing came out, I said, okay, maybe that was why he didn't work on Wednesdays, or we'd get these sudden shutdowns for no particular reason. I mean, everything would just come to a stop. That, as a combination with his Alzheimer's disease that was coming on, was a pretty good clue that the administration was being influenced by things other than actual policy. However, Reagan was such a nice person, genuinely a nice man, that a lot of that stuff was overlooked because, you know, we're all human. But they did two things for me. One, I was on a flight to Santa Barbara aboard Air Force One, and when I got off the plane, there was this gorgeous redheaded woman there in black leather, and she was doing PR for the city of Santa Barbara. Her name was Robin, and I ended up marrying her. And the second thing was that I invited my sister Irma up to a Christmas party in Washington. And she came up, and not only was she thrilled to go to the White House itself, but my pal Larry Speaks, the press secretary, arranged it so whenever the president and first lady were leaving the party to go to the elevator, Irma was standing right there, and Reagan shook her hand and talked to her for about 5 minutes, and later sent her an autograph picture, which was just a highlight of her life. And like I say, that was one of the best things about my entire White House career.
Oh.
The White House was, like I say, it was a tiring thing to have to get up in the morning early, feed the dog, let them out, get out to Andrews Air Force Base in whatever kind of weather, and then you'd go somewhere sometime. Flying, like we'd fly from Andrews in Maryland to Montana, and that took a couple of hours. And then we'd be on the ground in Montana for a couple of hours for the events, and then back onto the plane and come back to Washington in the same day. You know, it was physically demanding. And of course, Helen Thomas, she had all the seniority in the world. I just loved it. So she didn't like to travel unless she absolutely had to. So that left the other two reporters, myself and Dean Reynolds, who later went to ABC. His father was the anchorman at ABC for many years, Frank Reynolds. So Dean and I ended up doing most of the travel. Put in a lot of miles, went to a lot of places. Got very tired, and eventually, after a couple of years, I said, "That's enough. Done my time here." I had never really wanted to cover the White House. It was about the only thing I had left to do as a reporter, particularly in the wire service. I mean, there was nowhere to go, you know, other than stay there for 20 years, and I wasn't having any of that. My farewell column,
Yeah.
calling them liars.
Did you save that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I did not save a copy of it. Let's say it was widely read, and it was the reason that I did not get the traditional farewell handshake from the president. They were glad to see me go. And see, once you learn how the system works in there, and you start exchanging favors and all that kind of stuff, you can just see how the momentum carries over. And the strength of Helen Thomas was her staying power. She started covering the place whenever Kennedy was president. And so she got to know Jackie and the staff. And then later on, it's Nixon and all this. But she's the constant. And the young people who were working around these early presidents in her tenure had advanced to senior positions in the various parties as presidents moved on, and they still loved Helen. And that's why she got so many great scoops, that she'd been knowing these people for 25 years. And they would call her personally, and she'd get invited to private parties and things like that. I wasn't willing to invest that kind of time. I had other things I wanted to do.
Okay. So it's just one of your coworkers. There are other coworkers who since have gone on and become big names.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, at the time, we were just fresh out of the Iran hostage crisis, right. And Ted Koppel was manning ABC Nightly, and Sam Donaldson.
Sam was a friend. He was stationed at the White House, and he was around all the time. Actually, and he came to our wedding. There was Leslie Stahl, who is still a senior correspondent with CBS, and Andrea Mitchell at NBC, and a lot of the reporters who, you know, for the New York Times, mm-hmm. and everybody kept coming through. And what amazes me about and Bill Plant for CBS.
Was Hitchens ever among these?
No. Hitchens was not part of the team yet. Curtis Wilkie, who wrote the Boys on the Bus from the Boston Globe, a lot of really good correspondents, and they were all top of the game. Not all. There were a couple of people who had bought their way aboard through political favors, but at the time, and this is very important, at the time, getting a White House press pass meant you had to get Secret Service clearance, meant you had to meet some standards. You just couldn't walk in. But I was happy to see a lot of those folks go ahead, but I look at Andrea Mitchell and Leslie today and say, boy, the Botox industry must have really been doing, because those people are my age.
That's,
Oh yeah, we were covering a party, and we were just he was inside, and the press wasn't allowed in, so we were just hanging around the motorcade, waiting for him to come out so he could go home. And his daughter Patty came out with her escort and pulled a Hollywood red carpet thing, and she came over to a small group of reporters and said, "No questions, please." She just threw her hands up and got very histrionic, and we were saying, "We don't have anything to ask you. You're not part of this game." Nice to see. But the interesting dynamic was the First Lady. I mean, she was the straw that stirred the drink in that administration. The other guys, Michael Deaver and Don Reagan and that group, their main claim to fame were they're the ones that first figured out that television was the name of the game. And one of them once told me, whatever happens outside the television frame doesn't matter. You guys standing over there yelling questions doesn't matter. We're going to wrap that man in American flags, and we're going to put him on a pedestal and let him do what he does best, is smile and wave. And that became sort of the Bible of how to run a presidency as far as public relations go. This is smile and wave. And that became sort of the Bible of how to run a presidency as far as public relations go. Because you'd ask him a question, he wouldn't have a clue. I mean, he'd just keep on walking. And I remember whenever Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in Russia, or Soviet Union, and we were just stepped over to the East Room where the president was talking to the cat fanciers of America or somebody important like that. And he walked right by me, and I said, "Mr. President, what about Gorbachev?" Didn't have a clue. You just saw this blank look come across his face, and then right back to the smiles and talking to the cat people.
An actor.
He was an actor.
An actor. He knew Hollywood was the game.
Yeah, well, he hadn't gotten the word, probably, that Gorbachev was even in power. That was one of the problems with working at the White House. Sometimes you were among the last to know. Something would be happening up on the Hill or at the Defense Department or elsewhere, and when the White House was needed, then it would get involved. Or it would work vice versa, and they would send down something. But if they sent down something, they pretty much wanted, a press release out on it. And we had to watch them. We had to watch them very carefully. On one Saturday night, I was sitting alone in the press room, and suddenly they come around and they dropped a news release, a single page document and nobody's there but me. So I picked it up and I read it, and I made a couple of phone calls and put out a story, and the thing's on the front page of the New York Times the next day. That's how they were playing the media. If they waited until everybody was gone to put it out, then the thunder and lightning would hit when nobody was there, and by Monday there'd be a different story, and you'd never even see this thing. That was not it was an unusual example, but it happened all the time. They were trying to use the media, and the media, for the most part, we didn't care. If it wasn't Ronald Reagan in the office, it would be somebody else, and we'd still be doing the same job.